You're a good man, but good men don't usually end up winning, my fiancée said before choosing someone she thought had more potential than me. I smiled and moved on quietly. Months later, she heard news that completely changed the story she had been telling herself. You're a good man, but good men don't usually end up winning. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was letting me down gently by insulting me carefully. I remember sitting across from her at the kitchen table, the same table we'd picked out together at a store in Soho, the same table where we'd talked about what we wanted our future to look like. And she looked at me with something I can only describe as practiced sympathy. Not cruelty, not anger, just a decision she'd already made. I didn't respond right away. I let the words sit in the air between us. At the time, I thought she was predicting my future. Months later, she'd discover she had profoundly misunderstood both of ours. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 34 when Jenna said those words to me. We had been together for 4 years and engaged for 11 months. We'd built something real, or at least I thought we had. An apartment in Hoboken with a view of the Manhattan skyline. Dinner reservations at places we actually liked, not just places that looked good on a story. Shared playlists. A standing Sunday morning routine that involved bad coffee and good conversation. I worked in corporate strategy. Mid-level, but moving. Steady income, consistent reputation, no drama. Jenna worked in brand marketing. Smart, social, always plugged into what was trending. She had an eye for what looked like success. That, it turned out, was exactly the problem. It didn't start with Kyle. It started with a dinner party in Tribeca, maybe 8 months before the end. Her friend Andrea was hosting. The crowd was the kind you find in that part of the city, people in their early 30s who were all performing slightly better versions of themselves. I didn't mind. I was good in rooms like that. But Jenna was different that night. She kept gravitating toward a conversation happening in the corner of the living room. A guy named Kyle was holding court. Loud laugh, sharp blazer, the kind of energy that fills a room and makes people feel like something exciting is happening even when nothing actually is. He was talking about a startup he was launching. A tech platform. Disruption, scale, Series A conversations already in motion. I noticed Jenna listening. Not casually. Intently. On the cab ride home, she said, "Did you hear what Kyle was saying about his company? That's the kind of vision that actually moves things." I nodded. I didn't think much of it. That was my first mistake. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing Kyle's name more often. He appeared at a rooftop event Jenna went to with Andrea. Then at a brunch. Then in a conversation about someone Jenna had run into at a coffee shop. It was never suspicious on its own, but I started noticing a pattern. Every time Kyle came up, Jenna would find a way to compare. Not always directly. Sometimes it was subtle. Kyle closed a partnership deal already. He just moves fast. Did you see what he posted about his product launch? That's real ambition. I just think some people have a different relationship with risk than others. I let the comments pass. I was patient. I was secure. I didn't need to compete with a name. But that wasn't the last comparison. Not even close. The shift inside Jenna was gradual, but unmistakable once you knew what you were watching. She started talking about potential like it was a commodity you could observe and measure. Some people are just built for a certain level, she'd say. Or, you can usually tell early who's going to break through and who isn't. I asked her once what she meant by that. She smiled and said, "I just mean ambition, drive, the willingness to take a risk that matters." I was in the middle of a multi-year strategy project that was quietly reshaping how my company handled enterprise contracts. It wasn't loud work. It wasn't a startup pitch or a viral LinkedIn post. It was the kind of work that doesn't look impressive until it's done, and then suddenly everyone wants to take credit for it. I tried to explain that once. She listened politely. Then she changed the subject. I still didn't understand where this was heading. My best friend Shane noticed before I did. We'd been friends since college. The kind of friendship where silence is comfortable and honesty is expected. We were at a bar in the West Village when he put his drink down and looked at me. "She's measuring you," he said. "What?" "Jenna. She's not being present with who you are. She's running some kind of projection, scoring you against an idea." I told him he was reading into it. He shrugged. "Maybe. But be careful. People who think they can predict the future usually end up surprised by it." I went home and thought about that for a long time. I didn't bring it up with Jenna. Looking back, I should have. The engagement started showing fractures around the 6-month mark. Small things first. She stopped asking about my work with genuine curiosity. She started referencing Kyle's startup in contexts that had nothing to do with him. She began describing a vision of her future that didn't quite include the version of me that actually existed. Only a projected version that might or might not emerge. Then came the night of Mason's company event. Mason was a director at a firm that had invited a mixed crowd of professionals and entrepreneurs for what was essentially a soft networking dinner in Midtown. Qley was there. Of course he was. He spent 40 minutes talking about the valuation conversations he was having, the media coverage coming, the partnerships being finalized. Jenna was engaged in a way I hadn't seen her in months. On the way home, she was quiet. Then she said, "He's going to be someone." I asked what she meant. She said, "You know what I mean." And for the first time, I realized she wasn't comparing me to Qley abstractly. She was replacing me with him in the story she was writing about her life. The next 2 months were the strangest of the relationship. Jenna was still present physically. She still came home, still had dinner, still talked about logistics and plans. But emotionally, she had already started to leave. I could feel it the way you feel a temperature drop before a storm. Not dramatic, just different, just wrong. My colleague Devin, sharp guy, good instincts, pulled me aside one afternoon after a meeting and asked if everything was okay. I said I was fine. He nodded slowly. "You seem like you're carrying something." I told him things were complicated at home. He said, "Whatever it is, don't let it distract you from what's happening here. You're close to something." He was talking about the project. I nodded and got back to work. That was the one place where the ground still felt solid. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd had a long day. A good one. Actually, Hudson, one of the senior executives who'd been mentoring my development, had pulled me into a conversation about what the next phase of my career could look like. Real conversation. Specific. Grounded. I came home, and Jenna was sitting at that kitchen table. She looked like she'd been thinking for a long time. I sat down. She said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. She said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." I asked her what she meant. She looked at me carefully and said, "You're a good man." I genuinely believe that. But good men don't usually end up winning. And I need to be with someone who's going to win. There it was. Not dressed up. Not hidden. Just said out loud. At the kitchen table we'd picked out together. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't pull out a list of counterarguments or defend my 5-year plan. I just looked at her and said, "Okay." She seemed surprised by that. I think she expected a fight. A plea. Some kind of performance that would confirm the story she was telling. That I was the safe, static choice who couldn't compete with a man who moved loudly through rooms. I didn't give her that. I got up, went to the bedroom, and sat with what had just happened. The engagement was over. Just like that. The next few weeks were logistical and quiet. We divided what needed dividing. I moved into a short-term furnished place in Jersey City while I figured out the next step. I told Shane. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just showed up with food and kept me company. I told my friend Cody a few days later. He asked if I was okay. I told him I would be. I meant it. There's a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing love exactly, but from losing the future you'd mapped out in your mind. The apartment you imagined. The mornings that would have happened. The version of your life that existed only in anticipation. That grief is real. I let myself feel it. And then I put it down. I made a decision in those first weeks. I wasn't going to perform recovery. No dramatic posts. No sudden lifestyle pivot. No signal sending to anyone. Just work. Just focus. Just the long, unglamorous process of building something that actually lasts. The project at work was entering its most critical phase. My director Mason had expanded the scope. Hudson was actively advocating for my involvement at the executive level. A recruiter named Adler had reached out about an opportunity one wasn't ready to pursue yet, but filed away. I started working with a financial advisor named Wesley to clean up and restructure my personal finances. Nothing dramatic. Just discipline made visible. I reconnected with Carter, a technology founder I'd met at a conference 2 years earlier. We'd stayed loosely in touch. Now we started having real conversations about his company's next move and where my strategic thinking might fit. I started running again. Not for anyone. Not for appearance. Just because I needed the ground under my feet. My mornings became sacred. Up early. Coffee. Work. Run. Repeat. I didn't talk about any of it. I just did it. I heard through Marissa, a mutual friend who somehow always had information without seeming like she was looking for it, that Jenna and Qley had officially become a couple about 6 weeks after our engagement ended. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even particularly hurt. What I felt was closer to clarity. She had made her choice. She'd been making it for a long time before she said it out loud. I wished her well in the way you wish well a version of events you've already accepted, and I moved forward. 3 months after the breakup, the project I'd been building landed. Not with fanfare, not with a press release, but internally, it shifted things significantly. The enterprise contract restructuring I'd spent 18 months developing was adopted across the company's entire strategic framework. Mason presented it at the director level and made sure my name was attached. Hudson called it a model for how the firm would approach similar projects going forward. My colleague Logan, who'd worked alongside me for the final push, shook my hand afterward and said, "You built something real." I nodded. I knew that. I'd known it for a long time. The work doesn't care if anyone's watching. It either holds weight or it doesn't. This one held weight. The next several months compounded. The recruiter Adler came back with something more specific this time. A senior strategy role at a company that was beginning a major expansion phase. I took the meeting, then a second one, then a conversation with the board. I had a long conversation with an attorney named Bennett about the structural implications of moving from employee to something closer to a principal-level contributor. There were decisions to make. I made them carefully. Sawyer, an investor I'd met through Carter's network, came into the picture. We had a series of conversations about a specific advisory opportunity that I found genuinely interesting. Not world-changing, just substantive. The kind of work that actually suits the way I think. I said yes, quietly, without announcement, the way I'd done everything over the past year. Carter's company was growing. We'd formalized a working relationship that had started as conversation and turned into something with real structure. A conference in the spring, organized by Harper, a host who ran an annual industry event focused on emerging technology and corporate strategy, included a panel that I was asked to join. Not as a keynote, not as a headliner, just a working professional with a perspective worth hearing. I said yes. A journalist named Sophia covered the event for a business publication. Her write-up included a few lines about each panelist. For me, she wrote about the project, the restructuring work, the methodology I developed, and how it was being applied in different contexts. She called it the kind of foundational thinking that tends to surface later than it should. I read it once, didn't share it, went back to work. Marissa called me about 2 weeks after the article ran. I almost didn't answer. We'd stayed loosely in touch, but didn't talk often. She said, "I just wanted to check in." I told her I was good. She paused. Then, Jenna saw the article. I didn't say anything. Marissa continued. She reached out to Andrea. Andrea told me. I asked what Jenna had said. Marissa was quiet for a moment. She just kept saying she didn't know, that she didn't realize. I let that sit. Marissa added, softly, "I think things with Kyle haven't been what she expected." I told Marissa I appreciated her calling. We said goodbye. I put the phone down, and I sat with that for a long time. I'd heard pieces of the Kyle situation through different channels over the months. Not because I was looking. I genuinely wasn't. But mutual spaces talk. The startup that was going to change everything had hit a wall. The Series A conversations that were basically done never closed. The media coverage that was coming never arrived in the form he described. The partnerships that were being finalized turned out to be exploratory emails that didn't go anywhere. None of that made Kyle a bad person. None of it meant he wouldn't figure something out eventually. But it meant that everything Jenna had projected onto his future, the certainty, the trajectory, the inevitability of his rise, had been exactly that, projection. She'd seen energy and mistaken it for evidence. She'd seen ambition and mistaken it for achievement. She'd seen loudness and mistaken it for direction. And she'd seen my quietness and mistaken it for the absence of something. I thought about that a lot during those months. Not with bitterness, more with genuine curiosity. Because Jenna was smart. She wasn't shallow. She wasn't careless. She had simply made a very human error. She had treated the future like something that could be read from the present surface. She looked at Kyle and saw momentum, movement, visible effort toward visible goals. She looked at me and saw stability, steadiness, the absence of noise. And she decided that noise meant speed and silence meant standing still. She was wrong. Silence, in my case, meant I was working too hard to explain myself. I spoke to Jenna's sister Brooke once, unexpectedly, at a mutual acquaintance's birthday gathering a few months after the article came out. We'd always gotten along. She'd been warm to me during the relationship. She walked up to me and said, without preamble, "For what it's worth," I tried to tell her. I told her she didn't have to say that. She shook her head. "I know, but I wanted to." We talked briefly. She looked like she was carrying something she didn't entirely know how to put down. I told her I hoped Jenna was doing okay. I meant it. Whatever had happened, whatever had been said between us at that kitchen table, Jenna wasn't a villain. She was someone who made a decision based on a belief that turned out to be wrong. That happens. It just happened in a way that affected both of our lives permanently. The senior role came through in the fall. New title, new scope, meaningful compensation shift. I told Shane over a quiet dinner. He raised his glass and didn't say much. He didn't need to. I told Cody. He laughed and said, I never doubted it. I called my mother. She cried a little, which made me laugh. I didn't post anything. I didn't send anything to anyone who needed to know. The people who mattered to me knew. That was enough. Around that same time, I ran into Jenna's friend Andrea at a coffee shop near Madison Square Park. She saw me first. For a moment I thought she might keep walking. Instead she stopped and said, hi. I said hi back. She looked at me in a way that carried a lot of information without saying any of it. Then she said, you look good. I thanked her. She started to walk away, then stopped again. She thinks about it, Andrea said quietly. I'm not saying it to be dramatic. She thinks about it. I nodded slowly. I hope she's okay, I said. Andrea looked at me for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she nodded and walked away. I've had time to think about what Jenna said to me at that kitchen table. You're a good man, but good men don't usually end up winning. I understand what she meant. She had built a model of the world in which goodness and success were in tension with each other, where the men who won were the ones who operated outside the constraints of patience, reliability, and long-term thinking, where winning required a certain kind of calculated recklessness that I didn't have. She wasn't entirely wrong that such men exist. She was wrong that they represented the only path to success. And she was wrong about me, because what she called goodness, I'd always thought of as strategy. Patience isn't passivity. It's knowing when not to move. Reliability isn't limitation. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Discipline isn't the absence of ambition. It's ambition with a long enough timeline to actually arrive. I never stopped moving. I just moved quietly. It's been 14 months now since that night at the kitchen table. I have a career that's doing exactly what I always believed it would. I have friendships that are honest and solid. I have a morning routine that makes me feel like the ground is mine. I have work that matters and work that's coming that will matter more. I don't have the apartment with the Manhattan view, but I have something I'd choose over it. I have a version of my life that nobody handed to me, nobody predicted for me, and nobody, including Jenna, saw coming. There was a message. I won't say where it came from or exactly what it said, but a few weeks ago, I received something from Jenna. Not long, not dramatic, just a few lines that said, essentially, I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. I hope you're well. I read it twice. I thought about the kitchen table. I thought about the ring I'd carried for months before I gave it to her. I thought about the morning I moved my things out of the apartment, carrying boxes to the elevator with the kind of quiet that feels permanent. I thought about everything she'd predicted and everything she'd missed. I wrote back 3 words. I wish you well. And I meant it. She chose the future she imagined and walked away from the one that was actually coming.